So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the border scuffle between China and India. It's not, oh, it is kind of a big deal, I suppose, because you've got two nuclear powers kind of going at it a bit, and there was no live rounds used. This was mainly improvised weapons because they have a treaty where they can't use live rounds, and if they did, then boy, it'd be an absolute mess. And so here we've got details from the FT. So grim details of the clash that left at least 20 Indian soldiers dead near the Chinese border have begun to trickle out, revealing that soldiers used improvised weapons, including batons wrapped in barbed wire, during the high altitude rule. So these guys were looking to do damage, maybe not fatal damage, but a lot of potentially life-altering damage. So Indian media reported. So it's very difficult to tell how accurate details are because you have two very authoritarian countries that don't let a lot out unless they want the details to be out. So Indian media reported that the battle was fought in darkness on a narrow ridge overlooking the Galwan Valley in the Himalayas, more than 14,000 feet above sea level, after Indian troops tried to verify that Chinese soldiers had honoured a pledge to withdraw from a strategic position. So by the looks of things, it looked like the Indian troops went in there to make sure Chinese troops had withdrawn. Scuffles broke out in the violent melee. Some Indian soldiers plunged from the ridge into the ravine below. According to Indian media, the clash involved hand-to-hand combat and improvised weapons because firearms are prohibited in the disputed zones under a protocol intended to prevent an inadvertent escalation of violence. My only question is that, if you wanted to see if these people are gone, wouldn't you just use like a thermal camera or something like that? I don't know, maybe I played too much Call of Duty. So Beijing didn't confirm any deaths, but Beijing did mention that this is an editor from a Chinese newspaper, I believe. Let's see. Here he is. China's reaction to the confrontation was restrained. State media only ran a brief military statement confirming that there had been casualties, but providing no further evidence. Chinese social media reaction also remained muted. So these countries are incredibly authoritarian and censored. So it's difficult to get anything out of them. However, the editor of a nationalist newspaper, a news tabloid, mocked India's military on Twitter after reports suggested that most of his fatalities died from exposure to sub-zero temperatures rather than injuries from the fight, and not this sub-zero. Unfortunately, it was obviously just the temperatures. I don't know if it's right to joke about this. This is not an army with modern combat capabilities at altitude. Indian public opinion needs to stay sober, said Hu Jin at the Global Times. So he's saying, like, your military is a joke, take the L, it's fine. But you've got some escalating violence, not violence, but rhetoric, I guess, to anti-Chinese rhetoric from India. So Indian public anger towards China was mounting on Wednesday with protests outside Beijing's embassy in New Delhi. Indian social media also reverberated with calls for a boycott of Chinese goods. And so we can see that the the Indians are buying a lot of weapons from the Americans. So India arms sale could follow 3.5 billion helicopter deal. So we can see that they are getting strapped up and ready for war. And so we've seen the US pushing India to buy more farm goods. And this is important purely because of you're looking for allies in the world, really, especially if you India's. We'll get to that in a minute, but what India are trying to do is, by making themselves a bigger trading partner of the US, it makes them more important to the US. Therefore, if any more sort of conflicts escalate, they would expect the US to back case, essentially, to back them up. But the problem is, India raises tariffs on the US after losing preferential trade access. So the relationship between the US and India is not the best, purely because their trade negotiations haven't gone as well as India had hoped. But things could change purely because India have decided to, instead of escalate things physically with with China, which they have done slightly, with them moving more troops to the border, what they've done is decide to hit China in the wallet. So India's Prime Minister Modi has assiduously courted China's President Xi Jinping, setting aside a long-simmering boundaries dispute to pursue deeper economic ties. Chinese companies including Alibaba, Tencent and Huawei have gained a strong foothold within the Chinese growing market. But following a vicious brawl in the mountains that killed at least 20 soldiers on the remote Sino-Indian border this week, a senior Indian government official said New Delhi would pare back its economic ties with China. So what India are doing is, instead of doing a military escalation, which would be stupid, because I don't think the Indian military would stand a chance against China, even though these two are nuclear superpowers, I think India would get smashed. they've decided to hit China in the pocket, and so this will obviously impact China because you've got some of the big companies there. Alibaba, a huge company. I've never heard of Tencent, but they're probably a big company, and obviously Huawei. They've had problems with the US as well. So if they have problems with India, it could cause the company a lot more problems. But what we also know is that there are certain to sell certain products in India, you have to, for example, phones. You'd have to manufacture some of the phones within China, within India. And so if they're hitting Huawei like this and these other companies, then they're also hurting themselves as well. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. So we can see from this report that China had released 10 soldiers from the border clash. So China has freed 10 Indian soldiers seized in the high-altitude border clash in the Himalayas, which left at least 20 soldiers dead. Media reports have said the release follows several rounds of talks between the two sides in a bid to ease tensions after the battle, in which scores of troops from two sides fought with nail-studded batons and hurled rocks at each other, which is hilarious. At least one of the two militaries hurling rocks at each other. It's quite funny, isn't it? The 10 soldiers were freed late on, and so the way this is kind of, I think this is the place where the fighting is over, I believe. And so you can see here that you've got China on one side, India here, and obviously you've got Pakistan here. And so I'm not sure which exact area, if it's this area here or somewhere over here. It doesn't really matter that much. But you can see they've got some beautiful scenery in this place. And, you know, I feel sorry for the people of Kashmir having, you know, three extremely volatile neighbours. Essentially, you've got Pakistan on one side, you've got India on another side, and you've got China on another side, and two incredibly nationalistic, probably three actually, I'd probably throw Pakistan, incredibly nationalistic countries. And so there's the military escalation there, and we can see that Indians call for the boycott of Chinese goods. And what we have to remember is that Modi has been pushing a lot of nationalism on people, and it's tearing India apart because India is full of diverse groups. You've got a lot of Muslim people there, which a lot of the Hindu people do not get along with. And so by Modi pushing this sort of nationalism, it will impact his ability to make peace with China, purely because these people may not accept it. They might want to fight with China or further escalation with China. And they're talking about the Indian constitution keeping the country together. But at the same time, because of Modi, he's tearing it apart. So soon after the violence began on the 5th of January, so this is from the start of the year, Amir was standing outside a residence hall in Nehru University in South Delhi. Amir, a PhD student, is a Muslim. He asked to be identified for the first time. He had come to return a book to a classmate when he saw 50-60 people approaching the building. They carried metal rods, cricket bats and rocks. One swung a sledgehammer. They were yelling slogans. "Shoot the traitors to the nation" was a common one. Later, Amir learned that they had spent the previous half hour assaulting a gathering of teachers and students down the road. Their faces were masked, but some still recognisable as members of the Hindu nationalist student group had become increasingly powerful over the last few years. And so if these sorts of people started causing trouble at the Chinese embassy or to any sort of Chinese or even just Far East Asian people, which is very possible given the fact that some of these people are incredibly racist, and they see someone from Far East Asia, they might assume they're Chinese and start attacking them. And so here we can see that by stoking nationalism, you are asking for trouble. And so this is one of the side effects of it, because if these people, where's the article? There is. If these sorts of people want a further escalation with China, and they say, oh, what you've done is not enough because we've had 20 people die, effectively, and he's mocked our military. One of the tabloid writers, we want blood. We want something significant out of China, and you ain't gonna get it because China ain't nobody's fools. And obviously, it's more to know that China are incredibly bad in the way they treat Muslims as well as India, but that's a side point really for a separate thing. But we can see that these incredible authoritarian countries that will use nationalism to attack innocent people, others, the people who are outside of the main group, I suppose, Muslims, people with different ideologies, from different countries, different religions, they'll attack them viciously. And so what we can see from this is, I don't know where this ends. I hope they don't escalate in a fight. The only people who really benefit from this is, arms dealers, and sort of, I guess the US, you could argue, benefits from this, because that will increase, if China stop buying certain products from, if India stopped buying certain products from China, that would mean they would have to buy them elsewhere. Maybe the US would be an option if they can buy the certain things from the US. And so look, there was one more thing actually I found. So here we have, a bunch of, I think these are like bots or something like that. And so we've got 4 like identical tweet series. Watching Narendra Modi G live, he asked everyone to stand for Jawans for 2 minutes, and look what happened. I don't know why. This made me so emotional because mum is not at all well. She can't even stand properly nowadays. And this, so it's a picture of a lady. I mean, she doesn't even look like she's standing up. I think she's sitting down, to be honest, by the way the shadows look. And so look, you've got this picture. So this person has the same mum as this person. This person's probably a bot because you can see all the numbers. There's a third person and there's a fourth person. So India have a massive bot culture as well, and they're pushing this kind of thing that, you know, they're so proud of their nation, you know, 2-minute silence and all this rubbish. And yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.